Just I'm gonna get right into this. If somebody were to come up to one of you guys and say, "Hey, what's this Buddhism thing all about? What's with the robes and the shaved head, and why do you live this lifestyle?" And they don't know anything about Buddhism, never heard of the Buddha, never read any of the suttas. They have is a blank slate. How would you explain what Buddhism is and why it's important?
Ajahn?
Yeah, it's a great question, really common question, because we are kind of flags. I mean, you leave the monastery and you're just like waving this brown flag of I'm doing something different. I'm living my life in a different kind of way. So this is a very common question. And many people in America, in my experience, most people, especially in California or the West Coast where we both are, yeah, people are interested for the most part. It's exceedingly rare to have any negative interactions. So yeah, people coming to ask, yeah, what is Buddhism? And I think a good answer is just it's a way of trying to live a beautiful and good life, and that's vague, but it's also accurate. If a follow-up question was, well, what does that mean? A accurate response could be, well, it's a realistic way of looking at one's life and trying to lead your life in a way which leads away from you creating more suffering and discomfort and unsatisfactoriness for yourself and the people around you. So basically becoming more and more skillful at leading a life which is leading to increasingly subtle and profound states of happiness, which are less dependent on other people in a in an unhealthy way. So it's not the most concise answer, but I think it's fairly accurate. In terms of the robes, I don't know, Nisabho, do you want to reflect on that?
Okay. I'd say that the a large part of the whole path is, especially the monastic one, is one of, affirming something which the first verse of the Dhammapada, which is one of the more like seminal texts in the suttas, has a pretty famous passage that states the mind is the forerunner of all things. Suffering follows the untrained mind, like the ox wheel, or the wheel of a cart follows the ox hoof. Happiness follows the well-trained mind, like a shadow that never leaves. And as with many of the teachings, I think it's easy to overlook the fact, these sort of hidden implications of that is that suffering is easy to see. It's coarse. You can kind of put your hands on it, like the ox cart, the ox hoof, whereas a shadow and a lasting happiness are very easy to look over, and they're subtle. So it's kind of the nature of our suffering. One of the reasons we hold to it is because it's easy to see and to chew on. And I think we all have that experience of, going again and again to the same argument or fault or negative thought train that we've hashed over for decades. So one of the difficulties of the spiritual path is that you're holding up something that is by its nature more subtle and harder to see and can easily fade into the background if you're not careful to look at it with sort of a steady and nuanced gaze. So, part of the props and how almost Baroque our outfits are, that might be the wrong word, but how we're meant to stand out. And the Buddha was not shy about, putting together these very explicit symbols of the path in terms of the monastic Sangha, because what the spiritual path points to is so much more subtle and easy to see. So in a certain way, you need to frame it even more carefully and explicitly for it to have any chance of being seen in the midst of, a city with advertisements blaring from this way and that way, just to have some symbol that counteracts that or speaks to some other path in life. You need that, but because what you're pointing to is harder to intuit, then in some ways these robes, which are called the banner of the arahants or the enlightened beings in our Buddhist teaching, need to be easy to see. So when you first step into robes, and then your first time coming back to the West or walking through an airport, it can be pretty, and it's you feel that you stand out, but it's important that we eventually become all right with that, because even if 50% of the people think it's a little bit strange, maybe there's one or two who needed to see something a bit different and needed to see that there's some other path that isn't focused on money. And these robes imply a lot. We can't touch money. We have renounced a lot of those things, and none of those things are wrong by their nature, but the fact that you're able to live a happy life without them puts them in their place, and helps us remember what the North Star of our lives should be.
What's the North Star?
Ajahn Kovilo, what would you say the North Star is?
Interesting. I'm actually in a Buddhist university right now, and we have some non-Buddhist classes. So we have a natural science class, and I'd actually never actually looked through a telescope at the North Star or really understood what the North Star was in the sky. But this is probably, most people know this, but all of the other stars in the sky seem to be circling around it. So it's the most important thing in the solar system from a navigational point of view. And for us as monks, I think you could say that the North Star is the Four Noble Truths. That's one way of understanding it. The Four Noble Truths are that the truth that there is unsatisfactoriness in life. There is, our lives aren't perfectly happy all the time. Second noble truth is that the cause of that unsatisfactoriness, the cause of that suffering, is just the inner discontent, inner craving. We just constantly want more. We get a little bit of whatever we think we want, and then we're satisfied with that for a little bit, but then we start wanting something else. We're just constantly hungry, satisfied for a little bit, and then hungry again for sight, sound, smells, taste, touch. And then the third noble truth is that there is a cessation. There's an end of that constant unsatisfactoriness, and that is by learning how to not crave, and to not to give up all unhealthy and ultimately unsatisfactory forms of wanting. And then that there's a path, and that's through training in ethics and training the mind through meditation and training wisdom. So how that is a North Star is that these aren't just four philosophical points of view which are abstract and you think about from time to time. You can really frame all of your experiences through daily life through each of these lenses, and they all have different ways to interact with them. So when you see suffering in your own life, you don't try to push it away, but you try to understand it. When you see craving in yourself, you don't just try to gratify it, but you try to actually abandon it if it's an unhealthy form of craving. And when you have this idea that, oh, actually, I can transcend this craving, you try to realize that. And ultimately, the final realization of that is Nibbana. And how to reach that is the path which you develop. So there's both principles to see your life, to frame your life through these different things. Okay, and then there are duties. So, okay, I see suffering in myself or in someone else. I can try to understand that rather than push it away, which is a natural human response. So it's a pole star. It gives you direction in life. And that's beautiful. And that's something which I feel like will lead you all the way to the goal that's the plan.
It's like a shining beacon of hope for our own liberation.
And actually, to expand that metaphor more, the way you find the North Star is you find the Pleiades, which is sort of the Little Dipper, and they point straight to the North Star. So it's almost like the Four Noble Truths could be a bit of the Pleiades, and they always point every time to Nibbana, to cessation. But they're also the North Star because they include within them liberation as well. So I like that, Ajahn.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and that's what we all need, right? Some kind of direction. I feel like we're all lacking some kind of, just, I guess, maybe purpose, I guess you could say, some kind of placement here. We're all, it seems to be like we're just grasping at things. Maybe this, maybe that, maybe this. And like you said, it's never this or that. But it's good to know that Buddhism provides us with that. It provides us with the path, literally, like a path you can walk for your own liberation, so you don't have to go through it anymore. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah. How did you come to find this? How did you? Was there a defining moment in your lives where you just said, you know what, I'm done. I'm done with this Western lifestyle, and I'm following the path.
Nisabho?
I think there's like moments when we're young, especially, where certain inclinations are very apparent in us. You sort of see people in your lives who, when they're young, a certain direction is quite clear. And then, you kind of forget and you go to college or whatever, or don't. And then sometimes that comes back and you sort of find your way back, I feel. And when I was 15, I, like many a burgeoning hippie, read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. And, it's just a beautiful book. Not terribly Buddhist in some ways, but it's a great book. And yeah, that was my first sort of vision of a monk, in the vision, in the image of the Buddha, and just the idea that a life could be explicitly dedicated in form and function to the complete liberation of the heart, which a lay life can be dedicated to as well. But certainly it was very clear in that image of an enlightened being. So when that happened, I started to meditate regularly, and it just became the centerpiece of my life, like Ajahn Kovilo was saying, the North Star. And over the years, by the time I finished college, it was the biggest thing in my life. And at the same time, I'd seen that steady, we have a term in Buddhism called sankhara, which is sort of translated as volitional formation. I think in this context, it might be more helpfully translated as program. And it's sort of these programs or personality habits or ruts we get into of perception and action. And you see how over the years, they just pile on top of each other to the point where there comes a day when you can hardly feel your life anymore through this kind of crust of programs. And you're running on automatic, and the hedonic treadmill has you just sprinting. And by the end of college, I was in that place. Like, I was sort of driving down the West Coast looking into grad schools and listening to, audiobooks and top 40 radio, and stopping at Taco Bell and just trying to fill up the gap somehow. And then I stepped to Abhayagiri, which is a monastery in our lineage in north of San Francisco. And the silence there really struck me. And I realized that I needed a container like that if I was going to face my suffering and live a life worthy of my death, is how I'd put it. So yeah, that was sort of the clincher. And then I ran off to Thailand, and it felt like the first, giving my life to Buddhism and this path in this way felt like the first time I found a stream bed deep enough to hold my whole heart and purpose. Before that, it was like, all the stream beds the world had given me in terms of paths of action in life, they were all good, but not enough. And, when that's the case, the heart has no real choice but to fracture into, 100 kind of turbulent tributaries of this or that. And this was the first time I found something where it was powerful enough to take all of it for me.
Mm.
I'd be very curious to hear Ajahn Kovilo's too. I always like hearing the story. So if Ajahn, if you feel like inclined.
Yes. So keeping with that theme of like the Four Noble Truths, there's kind of a funny way of conceiving of different people's paths, like how people enter, people who weren't born, say, in a Buddhist country, or even people who were born in a Buddhist country, but who are just nominally Buddhist until they actually are really inspired. And there's this term of, you have firsters and thirdsters and even seconders. So basically, this is like someone who enters the Dhamma through the first noble truth, the second noble truth, or the third noble truth. So the firsters are the people who just have a lot of suffering, and like you're looking around for something that's gonna heal you, and get rid of all the physical and emotional weight that you're carrying around. And then you have seconders, who are maybe people who in a Western context would enter into a 12-step program. Your cravings and your addictions are just totally overwhelming you and totally crushing you again and again and again every day. And then you have thirdsters, maybe like Nisabho to some extent. You have an ideal. You realize maybe there's a way out of this. There's like a more beautiful way of living. And I think for myself, it was maybe also a thirdster, enter into this 10-day meditation retreat. A friend in college, when I was 20, introduced me. He said, "Oh yeah, there are these great 10-day meditation retreats and they're free." And I'm like, "Okay, sounds great." That was enough. So go to this 10-day meditation retreat, and you're being quiet and sitting meditation for 10 hours a day for 10 days straight, and basically just working on one meditation method. And it's just fascinating to see the peaks and valleys that the mind can experience when you're unplugged from other things. Yeah, you volunteer to give up your cell phone and all your different media outlets and typical ways that you distract yourself for these 10 days, even like reading. So basically your only thing you're relying on is the meditation object, and to see, how absolutely miserable that can make you feel. But also how, like, when you're really into the particular technique, just the blissful states of mind you can experience. And you can see how training the mind, like learning this technique or learning how to direct your mind in certain ways, can really have an effect, either leading towards that, miserable suffering, or leading in a direction of like contented ease. And that can be, independent of, physical, physical suffering. And I just found that life-changing, because it's a way of training the mind, which is so much deeper and more profound than the kind of the readings that I was doing in university at the time. So.
Where did you hear that framing of the firsters and the seconders, Ajahn? That's really good. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, I don't
Did you
remember.
come up with it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. Some other Buddhist guy or girl, maybe.
Well, that's great. Wow. It's good that the Dhamma is coming to the West. The being able to, like, you guys are very articulate with how you speak. I watch your videos and your speeches, and the way that you put things is very relatable and very grounded for people to understand, and that is important because I live near a meditation center. It's Theravada, and I've been there a few times, and I listened to a Dhamma talk by this monk, but he's from Thailand, and I mean this with the utmost respect. I can't really understand what he's saying, and I know he means well, but it's just like it's hard. Literally, the message gets lost in translation and what he's trying to say. But when we have people like you guys that are native English speakers, it's a very powerful thing for the Dhamma and the spreading it to the West. I don't know where I'm going with that, but yeah, I'm thankful that you guys are doing your thing, because it's very important for that translation to not get lost in translation. So yeah, that's awesome. Trying to think where I want to go with this.
I
Would
mean,
you go
there's a
ahead?
relevant just offshoot into that reflection, which is also, there is this issue of sometimes it's hard for that heart of Dhamma to get translated into our cultural and linguistic context. And it kind of remains on the other side. Another issue is when the translation and the articulation of Dhamma is so distant from the taproot in the other culture that you lose the essence as well. Like there's two ways of losing the translation. And I'd say one issue with, so much modern articulation of Dhamma is you do kind of, to varying extents, the articulation does kind of swerve away from the sort of beating heart of the, of that ancient wisdom, which has been preserved in the East. And I think that's a danger in the US to an extent is, people know what people like to hear and know to sort of, and teaching tends to veer that way. And fair enough, we need to adjust our articulation, but there's real value in sort of these, having a decent finger on sort of the teachers who are still around, who I think, many of them are enlightened. And, I think in the West, we can sometimes forget that. And that's another way it gets lost in translation somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like bridging the gap.
Yeah. Either side of if you're stuck on either side of the river, if there's not a decent bridge, it's a bit, troublesome. So.
Wow.
And I think both Nisabho and myself feel similar to you, like grateful for our teachers because, well, for myself, I ordained in America with a Canadian monk who ordained in Thailand, Lumpur Pasano, Ajahn Pasano at a Bayagiri monastery, who ordained with Ajahn Chah, one of the greatest meditation monastery masters in Thailand of the 1900s. And yeah, he's born in America, born in Canada, but, can explain things. I can ask him any question that I have, which largely are coming from, Judeo-Christian American values growing up. But he lived and trained in Thailand for 20 years before starting a Bayagiri. More than 20 years, perhaps. But he can answer all of my questions, which, as you say, like all respect to, people from Thailand or Burma who are teaching meditation in America. But yeah, there are linguistic barriers and cultural barriers. It's if they haven't been living in America, there are a lot of weird things about the way we think, as Americans. And we just have so many questions coming to Buddhism, new and fresh, and to hear answers from people who've wrestled with the same questions and have found ways to reconcile, teachings which on their face, or things or traditions or customs or ceremonies which just seem utterly weird, which, if someone is born in a Buddhist country, that's just the water they swim in, and they never think about, oh, why are we, bowing to this golden Buddha statue? Or why are we chanting for 3 hours? Or what's up with all this incense and the robes and all these other questions, which as Westerners, we think about for like years.
Yeah. It's almost, I guess it's a double-edged sword that we're not from that culture, but it also makes it a little more interesting that we're not from that culture. There is that disconnect in terms of language, but there's also that interest because it's foreign. It's something that's like, oh, what is this? Why do they live like that? So yeah, I guess it depends on how you look at it and how you want to digest it. Now, what would you say is how do I frame this? What are the pros to living the monastic life rather than the lay life? I asked this to Ajahn Sani. He just said it's easier if you want to attain liberation. He said it's just an easier way to go about it. Would you kind of say it's along those lines?
Hmm. That's a good answer. It's simple. Um, and for some personality types, especially, it's, especially helpful. Like in some one way of looking at different personalities in Buddhism is which of our defilements is most prominent. So you have greed, hatred, and delusion. And it's a overly simple framework, but for a greed, I have a lot of, I'd say greed is maybe my most prominent in of those. And it's difficult to be in this world of distraction and seduction and Netflix binges and, all that stuff, and not dilute my life. It's not like, that loss of purpose isn't usually explicit or tragic on its face, but that slow dissolution of purpose and the loss of our North Star, little by little, year by year, is a tragedy, despite the fact that it happens slowly without us noticing half the time. And I just, I know that I would have an extremely hard time keeping my eye on what matters if I was, in the world. There's so much. And that's to say nothing of what happens when you do, take on a family. And, we usually divide beings into 5 khandhas, the focuses of identity of the body, feeling. These are things you can, sort of we attach to. And, when you take on a spouse and a kid, you're taking on 5 more and 5 more and 5 more. A lawnmower is like an extra 1, and I mean, it does take a lot of time to make a living and do all that. And I think that if we keep, our practice strong, then you can use those khandhas, those aggregates, that identity in the world and experience as a route to liberation, even as a lay person, obviously. But it does, you end up juggling a lot of balls, and it can be difficult to do that and to keep your center enough that you can focus intention towards awakening moment after moment. So yeah, I think the monastic life is simpler in that way. I don't think everyone's going to be a monastic, and that's okay. And, but for me personally, I do feel like some people just have, you feel called to it and you feel more at home in this form than you would in any other. And that was the case for me. So I know for me personally, it just felt right in that respect. But I've seen monks who are, not having, haven't fit with the monastic life they've found. And that hasn't been, that seems hard. So.
There's something which is just so helpful about living with a group of people who are all like aimed in the same direction and all are trying to, look at the world and their own experience from similar perspectives, similar goals, similar path. And especially like if you're living in a small community, all have shared ideals of like not glorifying anger. I mean, it's such a rare community that of course, all of us enlightened people still have degrees of coarse and refined anger and frustration and annoyedness. But when you're living in a community that realizes that actually this is our own, like my anger is my issue and I shouldn't try to put it on you. And of course we still do because we're still deluded as well, but it just makes the path so much friendlier. It makes your community and makes life a lot simpler when other people aren't labeling you as the problem when people are accepting self-responsibility, that my problems are my problems largely, especially when you're living in a peaceful environment like a monastery, and where we have shared ideals of of confession or of asking forgiveness. So those are just some of the social elements which just really do make life easier when you're living with other people who are making you the butt of their problem. Then it weighs on your heart, because if the people you care about are not accepting personal responsibility, then it gets really heavy, and it's hard not to take on their view. Just the shared view is really, really helpful and really beautiful. And the friends you have at a monastery just wouldn't exchange it for anything.
I think that approach that Ajahn is taking of really pointing out the salient benefits of the monastic life that can be carried into the lay life is wise, because like what Ajahn, what you're pointing to in terms of living in community, people have this idea that, us monks go off into huts and just live alone completely. And the monastics I've seen do that, by and large, are pretty miserable if they do it for a long period. I mean, one of the beauties of the monastic life is just actually living in community. And it is so helpful. You have time to practice too, but just, as late, because not everyone is not going to be a monastic, but there's so many underutilized threads in the monastic life that the Buddha really did give easy access to for someone living a lay life. Finding a really good Sangha and community, spending time at monasteries around people like that whenever you're able. I mean, any monastery in our tradition will allow you to stay for free, for nothing, for as long as, more or less as you want, as long as, you don't burn down something. So like using those things, approaching senior teachers. I mean, you can access a great deal of unbelievably well-practiced monks right now online via Zoom, regular YouTube live Q&As, all those wonderful things. And then utilizing, another great thing that Ajahn Kovilo is referencing about the monastic life is the props and the rituals of asking for forgiveness and confession. And the Buddha gave many of those in form to lay people as well, in terms of taking a day a week to dedicate to practice. You can have someone that you ask forgiveness with or confess to every now and again. So I think that's a really wise thing to do, is just see which aspects of the monastic life can be incorporated.
Yes, that's fascinating. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote an essay. He said that the next Buddha would be a Sangha. The Maitreya would be the return is like is a community, and I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. And that's kind of what we're doing right now, or we have the potential to do, is create this worldwide Sangha, this worldwide community where we can share these ideas from centuries past and really, walk the path and live the path that the Buddha laid out for us. So, maybe he's onto something. It's an interesting idea. But yeah, so you would never go back? You would never go back to the lay life?
Ajahn Kovilo, you take this one first.
There's almost, so in different Buddhist countries, they have different ethos of how long someone will stay in robes or are expected to stay in robes. So in Thailand, it's very common. It's the norm for people to take temporary ordination, and there's no expectation at all in all lineages that I know about that someone would take lifetime vows. In Sri Lanka, it's a very different thing. Like, monks, when they do ordain, are somewhat expected to take lifetime vows. I think similar in Bhutan, similar in Christian traditions, but and I believe in Chinese Mahayana traditions as well, there are expectations of lifetime vows. But in our Thai tradition, they don't expect that. So we're not asked to, burn incense into our, skulls, into our head to mark that we're monastics for life. And there's almost a bit of a taboo or a superstition. Like, if I were to make lifetime vows, then that might, make some kind of comic repercussion come up. But short of saying that I vow to be a monk for the rest of my life, I really want to be a monk for the rest of my life. I think it's a beautiful thing. I have so much gratitude and respect for my teachers who've been monks for decades. And yeah, I hope to look after some of those monks. The Western monks who have ordained into the Thai tradition are still, the oldest one is Lumpur Sumedho, who's living in England at present, and he's, I think, 85. So we actually haven't had, we're still a fairly young tradition. So it's yet to be tested, how well us relatively young monks will look after the aging monks. But I kind of hope that, I'll be able to, stay healthy until I'm older. But regardless, I do hope that I can stay in robes for the rest of my life. It's a beautiful path. You're cultivating mental skills, which I feel are, you can only play sports for so long. You can only play basketball until you're a certain age. But these mental skills of training the mind in mindfulness, training concentration exercises, these are things which hopefully can outlast dementia. Dementia is Alzheimer's. These are aspects of the brain, but we do have, Ajahn Chah apparently had some form of dementia or Alzheimer's. And it said that he was able to have this knowledge, this knowing, which, although his brain was, decompensating, he could see it and know it and not be affected on a very deep level and not suffer from it, even though his brain is decaying. So I would aspire to something similar. Nisabho, what's your take on being in robes for life?
I can probably help take care of you, Ajahn, when you get up there in age. Although I'll be right about there with you, so we can sit on the porch together. I love the idea, and it's the form that's felt the most. It gets a bit, if you're just thinking about what sort of will be the most, where I'll be happiest, then on a broad level, I feel like for me, it is the monastic life. But there's also days where, you aren't, it would be nice to go out and have dinner. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that a more powerful recollection that is sustaining through those darker periods is really thinking what gift you have to give to the world. That's the best gift that you personally can give and are equipped to give. And I feel like when I think of that question, the answer very clearly is consistently my being in robes, just because, while there's immense gifts one can give as a layperson, and, for many people that will be the route they give back. For me personally, this does feel like my karmic draw. And I do think there's, a real use of having samanas, monastics in the world. And I think it's been something strangely lacking from the US ever since, the Reformation in Europe, which happened for good reasons, but, it sort of eliminated the Christian monastics from our, the sort of, at least being very visible in the US. And I feel like our culture has been grasping for that archetype ever since to replace it. I mean, you look at the sort of spiritual authority we invest in writers, and how people will, but Bukowski's not who you want to go to in terms of how to live a good life. Even Tolstoy, who was, one of my favorite authors. I mean, he was not, he was he was trying to go to a monastery for most of his life and never really managed. But, you see how our culture wants something like that, because I think there's a place for it in a culture, is something like that. And, if I can be, maybe my being in robes can help a little bit with providing some sort of figure like that every now and again, walking down the street or on a Zoom session. So it feels like that's, at least if for nothing else than for that, I think being in robes would be a good thing, because I think things are going to get hard these next decades. I mean, they're always hard, but things are changing very quickly. And I think that the world, it needs it needs a spiritual path to make it through it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you see yourself as the embodiment of that spiritual path?
That sounds conceited. So no, but I see and I'm a very imperfect embodiment in so many ways. But if nothing else, the robes do point to something which is helpful. And, at least that, like, at least if I'm going on alms round in the morning and someone drives past and sees, the robes and the shaved heads, maybe they think of the Dalai Lama that they've seen sometime on the TV, and that's a good recollection. So having some signpost in society that serves that function seems important. So yeah,
I agree. To show people this is possible. Renouncing not maybe everything, but maybe certain things in our life, it's possible. I agree.
Yeah.
Now, would you say Buddhism is almost like preparation for our own suffering, our own death?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, which sounds kind of depressing. But I think many philosophers, Buddhist and otherwise, have, I think, framed their lives in that way. Practice or meditation is practice for death, and I think practice or the meditation is broader than that. But certainly, it will help, for when we do, reach the final years or moments of our life. Being able to stay lucid, being able to stay with a bright awareness. And, in a Buddhist context, there is teachings on rebirth, that the final moment of death is not, the be all and end all of, experience. Things do go on. And, there are these teachings that is a pretty important moment in our life. Being able to approach that with as much clarity and focus and settledness as possible is a really important thing. But that said, I mean, we still have every single moment that leads up to that final moment. And that's much more, you don't need any kind of philosophy about what happens after death to realize the importance of all those moments pre-final moment. And practice of meditation helps all those moments. I mean, just on a mundane level, kind of pointing to what Nisabho was pointing out of, being an embodiment of some kind of spirituality, just for our family member or the people in our small communities who want to come and meditate with us. Many of them are American, don't have any kind of view about rebirth or anything. And honestly, it's on one level, it's not really so important. We're not pressing that, or certainly not forcing it for anyone who doesn't have a belief in any kind of afterlife or rebirth. But just all the benefits that you can see and are anywhere to find on the internet of this present moment, present life benefits of training the mind. I mean, it helps study, it helps your health. It's hard for anyone, the most secular person, to deny these benefits of. One of my favorite quotes is from Pascal, of all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And it's just so true. Like, forget humanity, like how many of my problems stem from my inability to just be quiet and be content by myself, just constantly having to feed off of my relationships with other people, or having to go out and seek all these different pleasures and not being able to just, know contentment, just watching the breath. And this is a skill which you can learn. That's what we're talking about. And it is a skill, and you do get better at it. And yeah, there are exceedingly pleasant mental states to be known through mind training. So
Ajahn, I was reminded of I heard, you may have heard this study as well, where they gave people this machine that shocked, you could like press a button and it would shock you, and it'd be like, it's quite unpleasant. And then they just put people in a room for like 20 minutes and like, you can't go to sleep. You have to sit there in this room. And after a while, people just started shocking themselves to have something to do. It's very damning of our culture. So
Yeah. That's how the mind works. We just want something. There's just grasping at something, even if it's something that's not necessarily pleasurable. We just want to feel something rather than nothing at all. It's the mind, man. It's tricky. Wow. Yeah. That's what we need, man. Just to be able to find peace in ourselves. To find, 5-10 minutes a day to just disconnect from all of this craziness and to connect with this peace. And it's inside of all of us. All of us. We all have that peace inside of all of us. We just don't know it. That's the thing. It's like we're almost afraid of our own peace inside, which is ironic. Well, a lot of people just are very it seems like a daunting task to be able to do that, to just sit down for 5-10 minutes and to just close your eyes and breathe, right? It's the simplest, hardest thing to do for all of us, but it's the most beneficial thing that we can all do, is to sit down and breathe and see what's going on in your mind, and see what's going on in your body and your spirit, and just to reflect and to really feel your entire being. It's definitely beneficial, that's for sure. And yeah, if it helps you out at your time of death, that's great, but it also helps you out in your time of life. That's what's important, and it helps us out to just be happier, to be more at peace. Isn't that what we all want? It all starts within. Like, it's just true, man. The kingdom of heaven is within. It's, a lot of other people say it. It's within all of us to have this peace, and yet we run away from it. Isn't that ironic? We run away from our own sense of peace, that it's hidden in plain sight the whole time. It's crazy.
Gary, I'm curious, you've had conversations with a really wide spectrum of practitioners and spiritual aspirants of various traditions. I'm curious, hearing the flavor that we're kind of speaking to, and that of Buddhism. I'm curious if there's any kind of other threads that are bubbling up from these other conversations, either of resonance or contrast, that you find kind of interesting. Because I'm very curious about these other articulations, both in terms of their differences and similarities. So is there any figure or conversation that's kind of coming up in response to this one? Or out of those conversations, is there one that was the most interesting that you've had, that's really sort of struck you and stuck with you?
It's hard to say. I've had so many and touched on so many different points, but it's all revolving around the same thing. And like I said, it's all within us, and it's all up to us. It's not up to anybody else. Nobody else is going to do it for you. We all have to do it on our own accord, in our own time, to find this kingdom of heaven, to find this eternal peace, and then to cultivate that within ourselves. It's not like all of a sudden you find it and then you're good. That's it. It's like an ongoing process. I guess that's the only thing that I can say. There's nothing in particular, but like I said, it's all touching upon the same idea, and it's all up to us in our own circumstances and our own individual pursuits to cultivate that peace that's within all of us. It is. I fully believe that every single human being is capable of maybe not donning the robes and living the monastic life, but at least we can find some kind of semblance of peace. That's there. It's always there. It's always there. We just have to find it first. And once you find that, this is a thread that I think is common among many other people that I've spoken to, is once you find that sense of peace that's been hidden in a facade of attachments our whole life, but once you find that, you never let it go. It's just something, it depends on what happened with people. Some people have had traumatic experiences. Some people have had psychedelic experiences. Some people have had 10-day Vipassana retreats. But whatever it is, once you get that taste of the peace, it's something that you just can't let go. It's just something that's just like, whoa, that's what this life's all about. That's my purpose here. That's what I'm supposed to be kind of living for, I guess you could say. So yeah, nothing in particular, but it's that idea. It's that enlightening aspect of just, something dawning upon you and saying, huh, wait, what about that? What about that kind of way to live my life?
Thank you.
That's really interesting. When you talk about getting that initial taste, I mean, it is really so important. And I'd love to go back and listen to some of your other interviews. And it is really true. I mean, Nisabho and I've spoken about it, but that initial getting the sense of the flavor of freedom, but it really does kind of, you need to go back and take another lick, from time to time. You need to reinvigorate your, why you originally got into it from time to time. I mean, initial inspiration, we've got the taste, but that fades. I mean, especially you see in a Thai tradition, the attrition rate for Thailand at any time of the year might have 250 to 300,000 monks. And I don't know what the average number, period of time that people are ordained. Traditionally, 3 months have been a common number, but you go over time versus the number of monks who ordain, and you're, decreasing, I don't know about quite exponentially, but people disrobe because maybe they don't know how to get, another taste of what was initially inspiring. You mentioned earlier, just like unplugging. And I think that is something which a monastery or a practice community can really provide. I would imagine, like many of your other guests or interviewees, almost certainly, spend less time on the internet or surfing than the average American populace does. And that's really important. And for people coming into a monastery, Buddhist monastery, obviously the Buddha didn't set any, he had lots of rules, but there are 0 rules about internet use, because the Buddha obviously didn't grow up in a time of internet. So, but yeah, people have to create their own rules, or within monasteries, there'll be different policies. So Abhayagiri in California has a certain internet policy, and there, everybody gives up their own personal devices, and there are, you have a period, maybe an hour twice a week to use the internet, and largely doing emails. But yeah, you're kind of forced to go, it's not completely cold turkey, but your options, you've intentionally cut off your options. I mean, people can disrobe at any time and go back and, go infinite internet bandwidth, whatever. But it is important and useful and amazing that there are these sanctuaries where the internet isn't our God, and we're not, constantly tapped into that. And obviously there's nothing wrong, as we're all, experiencing and evidence of at the moment, that there's amazingly beautiful and wonderful things about the internet. But when we don't know how to shut off and unplug, then it sucks. It sucks your energy, and it just sucks. And you live a life which is substandard, and you don't reach your own standards, and you're not really necessarily going to be a model of a paragon of inspiration for others. Perhaps necessarily. I mean, you might be an exception, as what you're doing is really exposing people to all these alternative points of views. But for, say, Nisabho and myself, we're starting a monastery in Seattle, and though we do have our YouTube offerings, most of our days are not spent necessarily on the internet. And certainly at training monasteries, these are places where people can, yet the majority of people are not using the internet, or only using it for a very short period of time. And to take time, and for people to make opportunities, whether you go to a monastery or not, Buddhist or otherwise, to make opportunities for yourself to unplug. It's exceedingly important to be able to get back initial flavors and tastes of why you're looking for something that's better and more subtle than the flow of society.
Amen. It's a tool, just like anything else. You know, you can build a house with a hammer, or you can destroy a house with a hammer. So I mean, it's all in how you use it and what you expose yourself to, and just have to be wary on the internet. It's like the Wild West. You have to really be aware. You know, be aware of what we're consuming on here, and if you're not aware and you're just mindlessly consuming, yeah, you're gonna get sucked in. You're gonna get lost in the sauce, and I don't know. It could be very destructive, and yeah, I don't know. Just be wary of what you consume on here. That's all I have to say. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the listeners. Obviously, you guys know. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is great. So, could anybody just come? Do you guys have the monastery right now?
Nope.
No. So it's in progress.
Yeah, basically, I'm in Seattle. Ajahn Kovilo's studying at a Buddhist university, ancient languages and other various subjects, and we'll be here in Seattle for part of the time. The monastery project, which is sort of at this point the aspiration of a monastery, is called Clear Mountain. So clearmountainmonastery.org is our website. And that's kind of what the monastery is I just moved to Seattle last spring, and I'm in a little hut behind a lay person's house who offered the space for me. And Ajahn Kovilo will be here for part of the year as well when he's able. And we're just at this point focusing on building community. You know, as monastics, there's an ethic of you don't ask for things and really rely on generosity in every aspect. So usually the process for a monastery or community beginning is you go somewhere and then you go alms round every day. We can't store food, you know, or use money. So basically, it was the Buddha's way, one way of keeping the monastic community from cutting themselves off in a spiritual cocoon and making sure we have direct contact with society regularly. So every morning, I have to go into Seattle to go for alms. And if people give me food, then great. If not, then they don't. And but basically, between that daily interaction with the city and every Saturday we have sort of these meditation gatherings in town, you know, the community hopefully will build. And if there's interest and people offer a piece of land or, you know, funds to search out for something, then we'll be able to. But we really have to have faith that, you know, we reside in a sort of confidence in the goodness of humanity, and if there's interest for something like this, then eventually we'll hopefully have a place you can go. But for now, it's a website, and at varying points, Ajahn Kovilo and I in huts. So that's about it.
Well, that's enough, I guess, for now. It's great that we're even able to do that, and we can tap into you guys' stream of consciousness just for free through time and space. That's still amazing. So I guess, you know, if it happens, it happens. But if not, then we still are blessed with your knowledge and wisdom. But we can probably wrap this thing up on that note. You guys have any closing statements that you want to tell the world?
Ajahn?
It's nice to meet you, Gary, and wish you all the best with your channel. And yeah, it is great to hear different perspectives. I'm studying at a Mahayana Buddhist university, which is a slightly different tradition from the Theravada, which Nisabho and I both ordained in. But there's so much wisdom and so many different perspectives, and I'm glad you're helping to share those with the world through different teachers. And yeah, maybe we'll meet up at some point in the future. So thanks for interviewing us.
Yeah, and similarly, Gary, it's great to meet you. You seem like, you know, just doing something very meaningful in the world right now. So thank you for bringing these perspectives out, and it's been a really nice chance to talk. And yeah, hopefully our paths cross in person someday. So if you're ever in Seattle, you know, email. So
For sure. For sure. Well, thank you guys for coming on. You seem like wonderful individuals as well. Keep doing your thing. Keep spreading the good word. Yeah, man. I appreciate you for coming on. This was an amazing talk. Thank you for anybody that listened. And yeah, other than that, hope all is well in the future with you, and maybe someday we will meet. If not, this is the world now. We're virtually meeting. But yeah, thanks guys, and have a good day.
Thanks,
You too,
Gary.
Gary.